G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle, and today we're going to discuss a tank that I designed. What's this? Fan art? Well, yes and no. In the Seeker and Punisher entry, when I was reading through it, I stumbled across this bizarre point, and, well, I'll read it out to you. The Punisher type Seeker variant came to general use amongst the legions in the final days of the Great Crusade, although the Punisher rotary cannon has a far longer history. Originally mounted on the now rare Cerberus pattern main battle tanks, the Punisher had established a reputation as a deadly tool in the eradication of mass conscript infantry or hordes of swarming Xenos creatures, limited only by its relatively short range and prodigious appetite for munitions. Married to the Sicaran hull, where the impressive speed of that vehicle effectively negated the short range of the weapon and the complex feed assemblies developed as part of the various Terran accelerated cannons, the Punisher once again saw widespread use among the legions, though now it was employed against the very warriors it was intended to protect. So we have a paragraph that talks about the Seeker and Punisher, but in there we find out there was a tank. It was called the Cerberus, not to be confused with the Cerberus super heavy tank destroyer, and it used the same gun as the Punisher assault tank, but it had a far worse ammo feeding system, and it was slower, and it was a main battle tank, and it's older, and it's defunct as a design. So those were the cues. Now, over the various years on this channel, I have taken many shots at the different designs of Space Marine tanks churned out by Games Workshop, especially when it comes to Primaris vehicles, because I felt they often missed the point with things like the Gladiators and the Repulsors by just putting so much crap on them, and all these little extra greeblies and such, which seems very tactical, but doesn't lend itself to the 40k universe, in my opinion. This is my effort now, and you will get to critique me and my effort. So, what have I done here? Well, let's start off with the basic design elements. So, there's two people I want to thank. Rudolph and Liam. Both you guys hung around for quite a bit watching me as I was sculpting this thing together and gave me some very valid critiques along the way. And I want to thank you for doing that, because they had some really great points. Liam helped me with just conceptualizing some of the ideas around it, and Rudolph pointed out, because he has Grimdark Terrain over there. Check them out if you're into your Titanicus stuff. He does a lot of excellent high-end sculpting, and I can't recommend his work highly enough. And he had some great points about things like angles. So one of the first things I actually designed this, well, the first thing I drew was actually one of these cupolas, these little hatches on the top. That was the first thing I drew. But then I did the side hull, and there were certain things that had to be done with the side hull. I knew it was going to have these jagged little teeth along the bottom where the wheels are. That's an element we see on Land Raiders, we see it on Seeker and battle tanks, so common theme. Also, being an Astartes vehicle, it had to have these overlapping armoured plates along the sides. Where I did the little side sponson, that's very reminiscent of a Seeker and tanks design. We added little things like these little rectangles here. These are very common little items that you'll see on all marine tanks. But angles is a big one, because I've given it a couple of little bevels on the front here, these sections of armor plate. I originally had a much steeper and multi-segmented cutout there, and one of the things Rudolph pointed out was, well, Marines don't do that. They stick to basically right angle, bevel, right angle. That's it. That's the design philosophy, and he was bang on, dead right about that. So I kept that in the back of my mind when I was making changes to this design, and so I've done that. A lot of it's straight, then it angles, then it's back to straight. That's it. It doesn't angle into another angle, into another angle. That doesn't look right for Marines. Those were obvious things that were done right there. We've also added in, well, obviously, these little vents and slots on the side next to the rivets, as well as these other sort of little slotted plates you see on the top of the hull. They're very common on Marine tanks. If I remove the turret and gun assemblies here, you can see on the top of the tank now, I've added in just the random ball that just seems to be in the top of marine tanks, as well as another vent. the little antenna and round vent that you see. So I've tried to incorporate a lot of the standard shapes one would see inside Stardy's vehicles. With the rear, of course, I've gone for the rear vents, but on a much steeper angle, so very much like a Sicaran battle tank, but just sticking out further. And I went for 4 identical sets of pipes at the back. I decided to keep it nice and simple for that. I could have done them stepped out or staggered like the Sicaran and the Spartan, but I don't know, it just didn't feel right at the time. And at first I was thinking, hey, if I could do 3 exhausts, because it's called Cerberus. Cerberus like the 3-headed dog. So that would work, but Marines don't do things in 3s. So again, these are those little rules that you have to sort of stick to when you're sculpting this stuff, when you're creating this stuff. Which, by the way, I've done in segments because I put them up on Cults 3D, so anyone can print this tank. So those are things I kept in mind. With the front here, I did a cutout for the vision slit, and I did a cutout for the twin heavy bolter. Now I've kept the turret for the heavy bolter and the side sponsons a little bit smaller. There's actually 2 versions of the side sponsons available here. There's the round one like that, and there is this more traditional one here. I went smaller, partly down to copyright. I don't want to stick too closely to Games Workshop's designs. If it's identical heavy bolter mount, I don't know that they would smile upon that. But yeah, with the little vision slit and that on the front, having that slot, it doesn't actually add anything to the visibility of the tank because of the angle of the actual lens periscope, but it looks right. It looks like something you would see on an armored vehicle, because Marine tanks love having these weird jumbled segments around the vision slits where armor steps down and it steps back up again and all sorts of things, and I thought I better replicate that in some degree, so that's what that bit's there for. Obviously all the rivets speak for themselves. Then we get to the overall shape of the tank. You see it's very rounded at the front here. So all Marine Heresy era big tanks, except for maybe the Fellblade and the Predator chassis, have this sort of segmented grille on the front of them. They're usually angular, and the newer the tank design, quote unquote newer, as in universe, the more angular that gets. So when it's on a Land Raider, it's sort of a slightly hexagonal trapezoidal shape. By the time it gets onto the Sicaran, it's just a straight 90-degree angle type thing. Very squared off. Well, with this I wanted to suggest some antiquity. If this is an older tank that's being phased out of the Great Crusade, I wanted to suggest that it's got this big rounded nose. Maybe it was some sort of dark age of technology thing going on here. We know that like the Men of Iron, for example, are very rounded off. So this is my little nod to that sort of technology, and I think it works well with these big front sections of track being nice big wheels and round off versus very small and pointy rear of the vehicle, because I've left the most aggressive shapes, the more pointy angular stuff, at the very back of the vehicle and smoothed and rounded off the front of the vehicle. And again, it's echoing things like, real-life Sherman tanks. Look at the front of a Sherman's hull, and that lower hull there where the transmission is, which I imagine the transmission's at the front in this vehicle, it's very rounded off. So those are design elements I've tried to carry through with this design. Then we get to, well, tracks speak for themselves. They're just Marine tracks that I just drew up quickly and I put them all around. Decent ground clearance, and I'll come with a dozer blade design for it later too, I think. But let's get to the turret. Everyone wants to know about the turret. So I'll start with the magazines. So these magazines here look absolutely stupid. And I mean that in the most positive way because, well, one, I drew them, so I'm biased, but mainly because I drew these magazines to look like an unreliable feed system. Because that's one of the indicators we have about this tank. We know it uses that Punisher cannon, but we also know that when they put in the cannon of the Sicaran Punisher, like when it got its own version of that weapon, it has this nice belt feed. Well, a belt feed is a newer, more complex feeding system than a box magazine. Okay, the box magazine's a little bit older as a design. So I wanted to do something like that, and in this case, a gravity-fed system, very similar to like an not even Ehrlichman, probably closest to a 40mm Bofors gun, World War II. Where as they're firing at the aircraft, they quickly swap in and out the magazines on the Bofors gun. And that's sort of the thing I had in mind. Maybe there's like a Sentinel power loader that can come up and drop one of these new magazines in. But of course, it doesn't have many rounds, it's short range, it's going to fire them really, really fast. And then, of course, I opened up the magazines. And my inspiration with opening up these magazines was I looked at weapons like the French show shot of World War I, which was notoriously unreliable, although I think it's a little bit overplayed. And the show shot has this magazine, which is very forward-thinking at the time, which is they cut this big slot in the side and see how many rounds you've got in it. The problem with that is, of course, that all the muck and grime on the battlefield can get into that. And it's not until we got to sort of more modern magazines with clear polymers that vanished. Well, I wanted to carry across that sort of antiquity, because again, we're looking at World War I and II as really guides when it comes to these sort of vehicles. So that's how those magazines ended up being, and I've just put on like these little, flip hatches on top that makes it look like this is where they're loaded through. You can't see it too well in here, but there's actually little guide angles in here that guide the different rounds down into there. That's why they don't just fall straight out the sides. That's a thing. So the main gun. With the main gun, I decided not to go for the big perforated shroud, although it's very easy to digitally sculpt, believe it or not. I didn't decide to do that around the barrels like on the Punisher. I decided to go for a more traditional barrel here, because I wanted it to look more like the autocannon that we see on the Predator. So again, a bit of a design homage. I didn't put the big slots and perforations in the side of the muzzles themselves to form a muzzle brake, because, well, it makes no sense to have it on this sort of the end of a barrel here. It won't actually do anything because the barrels are cyclonic. So that's the basic shape of the gun, and it's only the shape of the rear just to make it fit the model. It doesn't actually perform a role. In real life, there would be a whole new mechanism here that actually goes in under those rounds, but I didn't draw that way because it doesn't need to be drawn that way. So when I add the turret in here, and I'll add the little hatches in as well, what you end up with is there's a big ejection port on the side. It doesn't actually go to anywhere, but that's what it's supposed to be for these big spent casings to spit out. We've got a pivot point here in the side of the turret, so you can imagine that's the point the gun is actually pivoting on. Up the back here is the loading and feeding mechanisms, and this is meant to be some sort of little like service port and cooling system. Again, nothing too crazy going on there. With the offset to one side, that is of course a nod to the Sicaran. So again, carrying across those design themes. With the center here, this little like ridge or rib running up the center of the turret. I don't know, I just really liked the idea of it, and I thought, maybe I could have some fluff justifications. Talking about with Leadham last night was, it could be like a big thick armor plate is being welded in there to protect the crew from when that ammunition inevitably gets struck, or something blows up that weapon, or maybe the heat and the noise of that thing going off. It protects all those complex sighting mechanisms. When it came to the sighting mechanisms, I kept them really simple. Often these sights you'll see little slots or vents underneath them, but I decided I didn't want that. I want to go for just basic simple sights to either suggest that it's primitive, or that it's so advanced that it doesn't need as much stuff going on, that it's Dark Age technology. With the turret, I don't like the idea of having the cupolas and the round tubes that the crew sit inside slapped onto the side. Instead, I feel like they should feel like they're a part of the casting and they've grown out of it naturally. one of my bigger critiques of the Rogel Dawn tank was that point. And so here, that's exactly what I've done. I've done these round segments where the gunner and the commander are going to sit. They come out of the center of the turret. They're not slapped onto the side of the turret. So it feels much more organic. The commander has a proper cupola which is rotating and can open and close the little hatch on it, versus here we have the gunner's one. He's got a little periscope on top, as well as little slots that he can look out of on the side. Weak points, silly to put them on a tank for realism's sake, but again, this is designed based on what we see in other tanks, and with this large turret, with the cupolas the way it is, and overhanging the sides of the hull, this is very similar to what we see with the Fellblade and the accelerator cannon on that. Obviously on the Fellblade there's big stowage bins and such at the back. I've chosen not to put that in because I've instead added in these gigantic, silly ammo hoppers, which again, I freely admit they're a silly concept, but it makes sense when you're trying to say this is a primitive design which was poorly fed when it came to its ammunition. And so overall, I end up with a shape that I think is really pleasing to look at. Clearly Astartes, lots of room to put decals and symbols on the sides there. And yet, obviously something different to what we've got. I haven't gone over the top, I feel, and I haven't added on a bunch of pointless accessories like extra fuel jerrys and ammo storage and all that. And anyone could add that on. Feel free to, by all means. Purchase my model, wink wink, nudge nudge. You could very much do that, and there is nothing wrong with doing that, but I like simplicity. If the individual modeler wants to add something on later on, go for gold. It's your model at that point. But as the people providing the model, I think that simplicity should be the aim of the game. And so this here is my very first ever attempt at making a Space Marine tank, and well, I'm really proud of it, but what do you guys think? Do you think I got it right? My opinion on what a Space Marine tank should be, what it should look like? And obviously with the context of knowing that we're trying to ape certain design aesthetics, did I nail them? Did I get the showing off that bit of Dark Age of technology vibe with that front hull and bring back the echoes of World War 1 and 2? Did I get that right? Or did I not sell it to you? With the alternate sponsons, do you like those as an option? The main gun and me treating it more as a group of autocannon barrels all slapped together. And keep in mind, I took about 6 hours and I drew this thing completely from scratch. Not a single part on this tank existed until about 11 o'clock last night. I sat up till after 4 this morning working on it. And then I just did the exhaust for it when I got up. So, the turret itself, does that look correct for one of these domed saucepan Space Marine turrets? What about the ammo system? Do you think that the ridiculousness of it works, or do you like the fact that we can actually change these out for different magazines and put something else there? We could put rotary drums and all sorts of things in. And in fact, because of the way it's been designed, we could put an entirely different gun, like say a battle cannon, for instance, in there, which I think would suit it much better as a main battle tank. But anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make with the outer circle. Thank you all for watching this video, and like I said, it's your chance, your time to critique me. I've spent many years critiquing Games Workshop's tank designs. Now you get to return the favour, so don't be gentle either. Like, it's okay. I put my work out there, you're allowed to critique it. See you all next time.